Hi, and welcome to your demonstration of the Bridge Specialty Group quoting and binding platform. In this demonstration, I'm going to walk you through the process of setting up an application, getting all the way through to the quote screen, and submitting that off for review. The Bridge Specialty Group quoting and binding platform is built on four main principles. The first is multiple accurate quotes from multiple carriers, all in one app, all in one platform. Second, because they are accurate, agents are actually able to communicate accurate quotes over to their agents without having to go back and forth with those indicative prices. Third, you're able to download initial policy documents through the platform. For some carriers that do send policy docs back to the platform, you can also download things like accord forms, supplementals on the back end. We also have an upload tool, an AI upload tool that does allow you to upload things like accord forms, deck pages, and policy docs on the front end, which do save you a lot of time in the quoting and submitting process. And fourth and final, your quote data will be preserved on the platform. We all have those remarkets and renewals. Instead of having to go back to all of the carriers individually, we do have a cloning feature on the platform that I will walk you through in this demonstration, where you can clone an entire app and pull that on over to a brand new editable app. All right, so we'll go ahead and jump on in. The first thing I wanted to walk you through is a couple of tools available on the platform. So if you hover in the navigation bar here over Tools, you will see the Appetite Guide pop up. If we click on into that, this is not a mission critical tool. This is simply a guide available for you if you are on a call with a client and you want to get a quick idea of whether a risk may or may not be covered on the platform with the carriers that you have available. You can search by NAICS or SIC code. The search bar here is generative, so you can start typing in the NAICS code if you know it, or you can type in a description and it'll pull up some suggestions there. For the sake of this, we're going to go with 424910, which is Farm Supplies Merchant Wholesalers. We'll go ahead and select Colorado as the state, and then you select the policy type. Let's go with a BOP and hit Get Appetite Guide. In under a second, you'll have some results returned from the carriers. This is real-time data. Keep in mind, we are only providing these carriers with 3 pieces of information, so the outcome could very well change as you go through the application workflow and enter additional underwriting information. However, based on these 3 pieces of information, these carriers will let you know whether they would consider writing this risk. All right, we do also break down all the way to the individual carrier codes. So if I click into Chubb, for example, I can see that in the overarching NAICS code 424910, they will cover gardening supplies wholesalers. Chubb doesn't have appetite for animal feed wholesalers, for example. Okay, so we do break down the individual carrier codes to give you a bit more of a detailed look of which carriers you may want to focus on when setting up an application. Again, this is not a mission critical tool, just available for you if you'd like to use it. We do this exact same exercise when setting up a quote from the start. We do also have a report center. If you did want to generate some reports, we have 2 options. You can generate a one-off report. All right, the report types are available here. If you hover over them, it gives you a quick summary of what's included. If I click into it, it shows me the fields that will be pulled. Carrier usage summary is a popular report. You drop in your recipient email, your time frame. You can download a report copy directly to your browser. If you have a carrier rep coming by the office, this is a great report to have ready for them with some numbers. You can also schedule a report. Same report types available. You drop in the frequency of delivery, fill out these other fields, and you will receive that report on a regularly scheduled cadence. All right, let's head on back to home. All right, in the accounts drop down here, you can view all of the accounts that you have in the system. All right, if you wanted to add a new account, you can click New Account and then drop in the account name here. You can see that is the only required field. That's just to set up the account shell. These additional pieces of information will be needed when going through and setting up an application. However, to set up the account shell, this is the only piece of information needed initially. But if you do have this additional information, you can go ahead and drop it on in. Anywhere you see address, in our system, we do have a direct integration with Google addresses. You'll see it starts to pull back some addresses. That lowers that E&O exposure. Make sure that we're grabbing that address accurately. Okay, it'll pre-fill all of that information for me. All right, and the accounts drop down here in the navigation bar. We can also look at all of our applications. All right, this is set up similar to an Excel spreadsheet where you can sort by a variety of these columns. You can also apply filters if needed. All right, you can also search applications if you're trying to pull up a specific application for one of your accounts. All right, if you wanted to add team members from your agency and set them up with access, under settings here, you can go into team management, hit add user, drop in first name, last name, email, phone number. You click add user, they will go ahead and be set up with access. All right, next thing I'll chat about really quickly, and I will actually highlight this in a lot more detail in a separate video. Broker code configuration, so your broker codes will be set up by the bridge team initially. All right, so you will have these set on up. Any market or carrier that the bridge team has set you up with access to, they will have already loaded the broker code information in here. So once you're going through that application, you will see where those carriers are available to select as options. All right, and again, I will highlight this in a little bit more detail in a separate video. All right, if I head on back to home here, all right, we have some quick kind of high-level metrics here and then just some recent applications. If I was going to be setting up a new application from scratch, you can click that new quote button, which is always available on the nav bar. You'll also see it here on the home screen. If I click new quote, it pulls up this start new quote box. All right, we can go ahead and select our account, start typing it on in. We'll just go with Greenfelder and Sons in my demo org here. Select the policy type, very similar to what we did in the appetite guide. All right, NAICS code, again, this is generative, so I can either type in the code or a description. Go with offices of lawyers, and we will go with Colorado. And again, you can see in under a second, we got back what carriers are going to have this in potential appetite versus those that will not be in appetite. Okay, the reason we let you select and deselect carriers is maybe you've written this before with travelers and you want to focus on just travelers for this particular application. All right, if you want to cast a wider net, you can select some additional carriers. Just keep in mind that those carriers you do select, it will pull through the underwriting questions for those carriers. All right, for those not in appetite, we do give you the ability to select them. Maybe you've written offices of lawyers in Colorado, you've written a BOP with AmTrust, and there's an additional piece of underwriting information you can provide your underwriter that will grant you an exception. Well, we give you the ability to pull them on through in this application. All right, or if you know you're going to be heading to your E&S markets and you want to get those declines, the declines on the platform are legitimate. So we do allow you to select those carriers as well, again, giving you that flexibility. Okay, and again, you can switch to SIC code here if needed. Did want to call that out. All right, as I scroll down here, we have a smart document prefill, as I mentioned in the beginning of the demo. We do give you the ability to upload things like accord forms, policy docs, deck pages. A variety of different formats are supported in this tool. What this allows you to do, if I select yes here, it allows me to drag and drop, or I can click on it and it'll pull up my file share. I can upload, again, things like accord forms, quote docs, policy docs, anything you have with customer or client information on there, load it on in. This tool supports JPEGs, PNGs, PDFs, text files, Excel files. Whatever you have, drop it on in there. It gives you a big head start on that application. All right, it will extract all of that information, any relevant information, and pre-fill it into an editable application for you. Okay, so think of things like accord forms that may have several locations on them and maybe several employee types. This tool is very powerful. It will extract all of those locations and employee types and again, pre-fill them into an editable application for you, and it saves you a lot of time in having to key in that information. You can drop in 1, 2, 5, 10, 15 different documents into this thing. It is, again, incredibly powerful and operates around a 97 to 98% accuracy rate in terms of what it is able to extract from the various formats that the tool does currently support. Okay, so I advise you all to absolutely use this tool to your advantage. It is a huge time savings mechanism. All right, once I hit start, it would go ahead and open up a brand new application for me. We'll go ahead and just jump into one that has already been started. So this first commercial general liability policy, if we click on into that, on the left-hand side here is your application workflow in sequential order. All right, we did jump ahead to quotes here, but let's go back. We'll start step one, general questions. All right, so if I had loaded in some documents using that AI doc reader tool, odds are a lot of this would already be filled out for me. However, I can give it a second set of eyes and go in and correct anything that may not have been put in correctly or update a policy effective date, for example. Once I hit next, we get to our industry selection screen. Here, we are just confirming that we have selected the right NAICS code. All right, and then as I showed you earlier, we do drill down all the way to the independent carrier codes as well, the corresponding carrier codes that roll up into that overarching NAICS code. All right, we want to make sure that you are classifying this risk appropriately so that you're pulling through the right underwriting questions. This whole workflow is dynamic based on what is selected here. Okay, so we want to make sure that we're classifying that risk appropriately, lowering again that E&O exposure, and make sure that we're getting an accurate quote back to our clients. Okay, so once you have the NAICS code selected and confirmed, in each one of the carriers that you selected in the workflow initially, you can click into select industry and it'll show you which carrier codes fall under this specific overarching NAICS code. So Chubb looks at 561720. All right, it'll pull up a couple of different options. If I look at Coterie, okay, again, a couple different options. We have office cleaning services, residential cleaning services. Make sure that you're selecting that correct carrier code. All right, once we are all set here, I did want to mention actually you can also delete a carrier from the workflow if you'd like. Okay, if you look into the carrier codes and you see that what you're trying to quote here is not an available option for that particular carrier, you can remove them and save yourself the time of filling out the underwriting questions. All right, once we are all set with that, we click on to step 3, which is locations. Again, we do support multiple locations. If you had dropped in Accord forms with 2, 5, 20 different locations, it would have pulled all of those for you and pre-filled them into the application. If you did need to add an additional location, we do have the add location button here on the left-hand side. Again, direct link to Google addresses here. Fill out the corresponding information. Once that looks good, we click on to past policy loss. This is where you would enter any past policy loss information. Then we get to our underwriting questions. All right, what I'll call out here is a couple of things. We did a large data exercise with every one of the carriers on the platform. We got all of their underwriting questions and all of the corresponding most common answers and trained an AI model. All right. Second thing we did with that information is we came up with a common question section. All right, so on the left-hand side here, you'll see step 1 in underwriting questions is common questions. We found all of the questions where there is heavy overlap, they're duplicate questions across all the carriers and loaded them into this one section so that you don't have to answer the same question over and over and over again for each one of the carriers. Okay, so those common questions will pop up in step 1 of the underwriting questions here. This pre-fill with AI underwriter button, it will actually, based again on the training of our AI model, it will go through and answer these questions based on the risk, the information that's been entered, and the most common answers for that type of risk. You do still have the ability to go through and toggle back and forth or correct any information that was entered by using that pre-fill with AI underwriter function. All right, once the common questions have been answered, you can move on to all of the carrier-specific underwriting questions. Again, that pre-fill with AI underwriter option is available for each one of the carriers on the platform. We continue clicking on through, and then we get to our broker code section. All right, again, so the codes that have been set up for you by the Bridge team, you will see them available here for each one of the carriers. Once that looks good, you click on through, And that is about the longest part of the process. It'll take 30 to 60 seconds, bundles all of that information, sends it off to the carriers, and they will start returning some quotes. All right, so we'd see a bunch of quotes coming up here, maybe a couple of declines based on the risk. Okay, so if I look at Crum and Forrester here, for example, you can see the little ENS indicator here, by the way, indicating that these are non-admitted markets. Okay, they decline this because the selected industry code is non-appetite for Crum and Forrester. Okay, so if you click into declined reasons, the carriers do a great job of talking back to us and letting us know why that risk was declined. All right, at this point, again, once you've hit the quote screen, you get these prices back, and we are ready to submit these for review over to the central underwriting team. Okay, the majority of the quotes that we get back on the platform are accurate to the dollar. Okay, there are some carriers, Travelers being one of them for BOP, for example. Chubb, even though we got a decline here, Chubb also will return indicative pricing. They do reserve the right to change the premium if they ask an additional underwriting question or two, which in some cases they do. It's not often, but I do like to call that out. All right. Other than that, we do get accurate pricing back from all of these carriers. All right. When we hit next steps here, we'll see that submit for review option. We go ahead and click on that. Give you a notes box here in case you want to add some additional notes to this request. Send that off to the central team. All right, so once I click yes here, and I've populated some notes if necessary, that will go on off to the central underwriting team internally. They'll go ahead and review that, and they will follow up with you within a day or two. So it's as simple as that. All right, we do also let you change the limits. There is a limit drop down here. Okay, so whatever limits do come through or actually coming through directly from the carrier, these were not generated by the bridge team. These are coming directly from the carrier. Okay, so you'll see options obviously vary across all of the different carriers. If I select a new limit, it will recalculate the premium, but just for that carrier. It won't refresh the entire screen. We do also have quote details available. All right, we have a quote ID here that was generated by the carrier. If there are taxes and surcharges in the state you're writing in, this is where I would break those out, and then a confirmation again of those liability limits. All right, as I mentioned earlier in the demo, we do, again, have the ability to download a quote form. So once we get to the quote screen here, I can actually click download a quote. I can select one, two, or several different options, the different types of accord forms. I can attach the underwriting question supplemental form. I can download it as a separate PDF or attach it to any one of these accord forms. I hit download, it'll take all the information that was pre-filled in the application workflow and populate it into editable PDFs. So you do still have the ability to open that in your Adobe Acrobat or your Lumens editor and add or edit any information, modify any information that was populated into the accord forms, but we do make that a nice, easy, simple process for you. If you select one, it'll download to your browser. Any more than that, it'll typically send it to you via email. A zip file, just given the size of the file, so I do like to just call that out. But again, we do give you the ability to download those accord forms filled with all the information in the workflow and save you some time. We also have a document center where you can store any relevant documentation for this particular risk. Okay, so for HHH Inc. here, if I have any sort of policy docs or deck pages, whatnot, whatever I want to save for this particular client, I can save it off in the document center here. Doesn't have any sort of function to be able to send out from here, but again, if you're trying to store some relevant documents for this particular client, we do give you the ability to do that directly on the platform. All right, I'll quickly walk you through the cloning feature, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up the demonstration here. If I click this back arrow, you'll see it goes back to account. Okay, so we're on the account page here for HHH Inc. And here we see that commercial GL policy, or application rather. All right, under the actions column here, we can click this little actions button and head on over to the clone application option. This tool is very helpful if you are approaching, let's say, a renewal period. So let's say we wrote and bound this policy, this commercial GL policy for HHH Inc. here, and we're coming up on a year we want to go ahead and remarket this thing. We have access maybe to an additional carrier or two. You can actually create a reminder as well. I did want to mention that. You can set a reminder date, again, 10 months out, 11 months out from that expiration date. Select the recipient type, enter a little message here, create a reminder, and the system will go ahead and remind you as you approach that renewal period so you can come back in and remarket this thing. Okay, now it's as simple as, again, clicking on that, going to clone application. It'll default to GL here. It'll give me the list of carriers. Again, I can add any carriers that maybe I now have access to that I didn't have access to a year ago. I can hit clone, and it'll pull over all of this information from this GL policy over to a brand new editable application. Okay, so I can click through. If everything is the same, maybe I just update the effective date. If nothing material has changed, I can get through that and have this thing remarketed in a matter of minutes. Okay, so big time savings mechanism. We also allow you to clone across policy type. Okay, so if for HHH Inc., I wrote a commercial GL policy and now they're looking for a work comp quote, I can click work comp. It'll pull up the carriers on the platform that write work comp. Again, I can add any additional carriers. I hit clone. It'll pull over all that information from that GL app to a brand new editable workers' comp app. I will have to fill in the gaps. Okay, so whatever material information is needed for a work comp app that maybe I didn't capture in that GL application, I will have to go and plug that in, but everything else will be there and it'll save you a ton of time from having to manually key all of that information in. All right, so big time savings mechanism there. Please use this to your advantage when looking at quoting several different policy types for a particular insured, or again, for those remarkets and renewals. All right. That wraps up the demonstration. Thanks so much for tuning on in. Let us know if you have any questions, and happy quoting.